The December wind howled like a pack of wolves across the Montana plains, and Beatrice Harlow knew she was going to die out here alone with her secret still locked inside her chest. She had left but 3 days ago, convinced she could make it to her sister's homestead before the weather turned. The stagecoach driver had warned her about traveling this late in the season, but Beatrice had been desperate to leave, to escape the knowing looks and whispered gossip that followed her everywhere since she had returned from Boston 6 months pregnant and without a husband. Now her mare had thrown a shoe and gone lame 2 miles back, and the snow was falling so thick she could barely see her own hands clutching the reins. The wind cut through her wool coat like it was made of paper. Beatrice dismounted, her boots sinking into snow that was already past her ankles. She reached for the saddlebag containing what little food she had left and the bundle of letters she had written to her unborn child, explaining everything. Explaining why she had run from Boston when Marcus Pemberton had made it clear he would never marry a woman he considered beneath his station, no matter whose baby she carried. Explaining why she could not face the shame in Butte, where everyone had known her since she was a girl. The mare whinnied pitifully, and Beatrice pressed her forehead against the animal's neck. "I am sorry, girl. I am so sorry." She did not know which direction to walk. The snow was falling sideways now, stinging her face, and the world had become nothing but white in every direction. Beatrice took 3 steps and stumbled, catching herself against a boulder she had not seen. Her hands were already numb inside her gloves. She thought of the baby, 6 months along now, moving inside her. A secret she had told no one, hidden beneath loose dresses and the assumption that she had simply grown plump in Boston. Only her sister knew the truth, and only because Beatrice had written to her in desperation. "Come stay with me," the letter had said. "No one here knows you. You can start fresh." But Beatrice was not going to make it to her sister's homestead. She was not going to make it anywhere. She sank down beside the boulder, pulling her coat tight around her middle and closed her eyes against the stinging snow. At least it would be quick, she thought. At least the cold would take her before hunger did. That was when she heard the horse. At first, Beatrice thought she was imagining it, that her frozen mind was conjuring sounds from the wind. But then she heard it again, closer now, and a voice calling out through the storm. "Hello. Is someone out there?" Beatrice tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. She managed a weak cry, barely audible over the wind, and then the world tilted sideways as consciousness slipped away from her like sand through fingers. When she woke, she was moving. Strong arms held her against a chest that smelled of leather and wood smoke, and she could feel the rhythm of a horse beneath them. Beatrice forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a face half obscured by a snow-covered hat and a wool scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. "Easy now," the man said, his voice a low rumble she could feel through his chest. "I've got you, just hold on a little longer." "My horse," Beatrice managed through chattering teeth. "Already got her. She is tied to my pack mule. Now stop talking and save your strength." Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to ask where he was taking her, but the warmth of his body against hers was making her drowsy. She let her eyes close again and allowed herself to drift. The next time she woke, she was lying on something soft, and blessed warmth surrounded her. Beatrice opened her eyes to find herself in a small cabin, tucked beneath thick quilts on a narrow bed near a stone fireplace where a fire crackled and popped. The light coming through the single window was dim, suggesting either late afternoon or early morning. "You are awake." Beatrice turned her head to see the man from the storm sitting at a rough wooden table across the room. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes the color of summer grass. His face was handsome in a weathered way, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He wore a simple cotton shirt and suspenders, and Beatrice realized with a start that someone had removed her wet clothes. She pulled the quilts up to her chin. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 8 miles northwest of where I found you." He stood and moved to the fireplace where a pot hung over the flames. "You have been asleep for almost 12 hours. I was starting to worry." "Who are you?" "Colton Barnes. I run cattle up in the high country during summer, trap during winter." He ladled something from the pot into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink this. It is just broth, but you need to get something warm in you." Beatrice took the cup with shaking hands, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. The broth was simple but good, rich with the flavor of beef and vegetables. She drank it slowly, watching Colton over the rim of the cup. He had returned to the table and was carefully not looking at her, which she appreciated. "Thank you," she said when the cup was empty. "You saved my life." "I did what anyone would do." He glanced at her then, his green eyes steady. "What were you doing out in that storm alone?" Beatrice looked down at the quilts. "Traveling to my sister's homestead. She lives about 20 miles east of Butte." 20 miles east would be the Walker place. I know it. "That is still a good 50 miles from where I found you. You were heading the wrong direction." "The storm turned me around. My horse threw a shoe and went lame, and I got lost in the snow." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. Colton was quiet for a moment. "Your horse will be fine. The shoe was not hard to replace, and I have got her in the lean-to with my animals. She just needs rest." Relief flooded through Beatrice. "Thank you. I cannot pay you much, but I have a little money." "I do not want your money." Colton stood and moved to the window, looking out at what Beatrice could now see was still falling snow. "Storm is not letting up. Looks like we might be snowed in for a few days at least." A few days. Alone in this cabin with a strange man. Beatrice felt panic rise in her chest, though she tried to keep it from showing on her face. "I should not impose on you like that. If you could just point me in the right direction when the storm clears." "Miss, it is December in Montana. That storm out there could dump 3 feet of snow on us before it is done. You would not make it a mile, even on a sound horse." He turned back to face her, and his expression was gentle. "You are safe here, I promise you that." Something in his voice made Beatrice believe him. She nodded slowly. "All right, thank you. You should rest more. I will make something for supper later." He reached for a heavy coat hanging by the door. "I need to check on the animals and bring in more firewood. Will you be all right alone for a bit?" "Yes, I will be fine." After he left, Beatrice allowed herself to relax slightly. She looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings. A table and 2 chairs, a small cookstove in addition to the fireplace, shelves lined with tin cans and sacks of flour and beans. A few traps hung on the wall, along with a rifle and a pair of snowshoes. It was a bachelor's dwelling, clean but sparse. She pushed back the quilts and stood carefully, testing her strength. Her legs were wobbly but held. Someone had dressed her in what must be one of Colton's shirts, which hung nearly to her knees. Her own clothes were draped over chairs near the fire, almost dry. Beatrice moved to the window and looked out at the storm. Snow swirled past in thick curtains, and she could barely make out the shape of the lean to where Colton was presumably tending to the animals. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with cold. She was trapped here with a strange man, carrying another man's baby, and no one knew where she was. Beatrice pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the small swell there beneath the oversized shirt. "We are all right," she whispered. "We are going to be all right." When Colton returned, his arms loaded with split wood, Beatrice was dressed in her own clothes and sitting in one of the chairs by the table. He stacked the wood by the fireplace without comment, then brushed the snow from his coat and hung it up. "You should not be out of bed yet," he said, but his tone was mild, not scolding. "I have been lying down for 12 hours. I needed to move." Beatrice folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Barnes, I want to thank you again for your kindness. I know this situation is unusual, and I do not want you to think that I am anything other than respectable." Colton turned to look at her, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. "Miss, I found you half frozen in a blizzard. I am not thinking anything except that you are lucky to be alive. Still, being alone together like this, when the storm clears and I go to my sister's, I do not want there to be any misunderstanding about what happened here." "There will not be any misunderstanding because there is nothing to misunderstand. You needed help and I helped you, that is all." He moved to the cook stove and began pulling out ingredients. "Now I am going to make supper. Can you cook?" The question surprised her. "Yes, I can cook." "Good. Then you can help. I am not much for fancy meals, but I can manage stew and biscuits if I put my mind to it." They worked together in the small space of the cabin, and Beatrice found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Colton was easy to be around, not given to unnecessary chatter, but not awkwardly silent either. He moved with the economy of someone used to doing for himself, and he let Beatrice take over the biscuit-making without any of the skepticism she had often encountered from men who thought women's contributions were negligible. As they ate, Beatrice found herself curious about this man who had saved her life. "Have you lived out here long?" "About 4 years. I came out from Missouri after the war, worked on a cattle drive up from Texas, then hired on with a ranch near Butte. Saved up enough to buy some land and start my own small operation." "Do you like it? The solitude?" Colton was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "Most days. It is honest work and I am my own man. That counts for something." "Do you ever get lonely?" He met her eyes then, and Beatrice saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Sometimes. But being alone is not the same as being lonely. I learned that during the war." Beatrice wanted to ask more, wanted to know what he had seen and done, but something in his expression told her not to push. Instead, she said, "I know what you mean. I spent 3 years in Boston, surrounded by people all the time, and I have never felt more alone in my life." "Is that where you are coming from? Boston?" She nodded. "I went there to stay with my aunt and uncle and to attend finishing school. They thought it would improve my prospects." "Did it?" Beatrice laughed, but there was no humor in it. "In a manner of speaking. I learned which fork to use for fish and how to paint watercolors and play the piano. Very useful skills for ranch country." Colton smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "I imagine the cows would appreciate a good piano recital." Despite everything, Beatrice found herself smiling back. "I will keep that in mind." They cleaned up the supper dishes together, and then Colton insisted that Beatrice take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he would not hear of it. "I have slept on harder ground than this floor," he said, "and you need the rest more than I do." Beatrice did not argue further. She was exhausted and the bed was soft and warm. She lay awake for a while, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet sounds of Colton settling himself on the floor. The baby moved inside her, a flutter like butterfly wings, and she pressed her hand to the spot. "Good night, Mr. Barnes," she said into the darkness. "Good night, Miss Harlow. Sleep well." She did sleep well, better than she had in months, and when she woke in the morning, the cabin was warm and the smell of coffee filled the air. Colton was already up, standing at the window and looking out, still snowing. Beatrice asked, pushing herself upright, Finally stopped about an hour ago, but we have got at least 2 feet on the ground, maybe more in the drifts. It will be a few days before the trails are passable." Beatrice joined him at the window and caught her breath at the sight. The world outside was transformed into something out of a fairy tale, everything buried under a blanket of pristine white that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "I have never seen so much snow," she whispered. "This is Montana. Sometimes winter does not fool around." Colton moved to pour her a cup of coffee. "But we have got plenty of food and firewood. We will be fine." The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm that surprised Beatrice with its comfort. Each morning, Colton would tend to the animals while she made breakfast. They would eat together, talking about small things, nothing too personal. Then Colton would do whatever outdoor work needed doing, checking his trap lines or chopping more wood, while Beatrice tidied the cabin and prepared the midday meal. The afternoons were when they really talked. Colton had a small collection of books, and Beatrice had not read any of them. She would read aloud while he mended tack or worked on repairing a saddle, and sometimes they would discuss what she had read. Other times, they would simply talk about their lives. Beatrice learned that Colton had lost his parents to cholera when he was 16 and had raised his younger sister by himself until she married a farmer in Kansas. He had fought for the Union during the war and had seen things he did not like to talk about. He loved the mountains and the wide, open spaces of Montana, loved the way the seasons turned, and the honesty of working with animals. She told him about growing up in Butte, about her father who had died in a mining accident when she was 12, about her mother who had remarried and moved to California with her new husband. She told him about the loneliness of Boston, about feeling like she did not fit anywhere. But she did not tell him about the baby. Not yet. On the fourth day, Colton came in from checking his trap lines with a grim expression. Beatrice looked up from the bread she was kneading and felt her stomach tighten. "What is wrong?" "Trail is clear enough that I could probably get you to your sister's place tomorrow if we start early." He did not sound happy about it. Beatrice's hands stilled in the dough. Tomorrow. She should be relieved, should be eager to get to her sister's and safety. Instead, she felt something twist in her chest. "That is good news," she made herself say. "Yes." Colton hung up his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "I will get your mare ready at first light. It is about a half-day's ride if we take it slow. You do not have to come with me. I can find my way now that the storm has cleared." He turned to look at her, and his expression was almost fierce. "I am not letting you ride out there alone. I will see you safely to your sister's door." The intensity in his voice made Beatrice's pulse quicken. "All right, thank you." That night, neither of them slept well. Beatrice lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to Colton shift restlessly on his pallet. She thought about the past few days, about how comfortable she had become here in this small cabin with this quiet, kind man. She thought about going to her sister's place, about the questions that would be asked and the future she would face as an unmarried mother. And she thought about the secret she was still keeping from Colton, the one she needed to tell him before they parted ways. In the morning, Beatrice woke early and found Colton already preparing the horses. She made a quick breakfast, but neither of them ate much. They moved around each other with careful politeness, and the easy comfort of the past few days had been replaced by an awkward tension. When everything was ready, Colton helped Beatrice mount her mare. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked down at him, his eyes were filled with something she could not quite name. "Colton, I need to tell you something before we go." He stepped back, his expression closing off slightly. "You do not owe me any explanations, Miss Harlow, please. I need to say this." Beatrice took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I am with child, 6 months along. That is why I left Boston, why I was traveling to my sister's. The father is a man from Boston who made it clear he would never marry me. I could not face the shame and butt, so I am running away to start over somewhere no one knows me. Colton was very still, his face unreadable. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved my life, and you have been nothing but kind to me, and I do not want to leave here with lies between us. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. I know this changes things. I know you probably think less of me now, but I needed you to know the truth. For a long moment, Colton said nothing. Then he reached up and took her hand in his. I do not think less of you, not even a little bit. You do not, Beatrice. I have known since the first night. When I had to get you out of your wet clothes, it was obvious. I did not say anything because I figured you would tell me when you were ready. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. And it does not change a single thing about who you are or how I see you. Beatrice felt the tears spill over then, hot against her cold cheeks. How can you say that? I am ruined. I am carrying another man's child out of wedlock. Any decent person would be scandalized. I am not any decent person. Colton's voice was low and intense. And you are not ruined. You are brave and strong, and you survived something that would have broken a weaker woman. The man who let you go is a fool, and his loss is profound. The words hung in the cold air between them, and Beatrice felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Colton, I know we have only known each other a few days. I know this is madness. But Beatrice, I have to tell you before you ride away from here. He paused, seeming to gather himself. I do not want you to go. What are you saying? I am saying that these past few days have been the best days I have had in years. I am saying that when I look at you, I see everything I did not know I was missing. I am saying that I do not care about Boston or that baby's father or anything except that I want you to stay. He took a shaky breath. Stay with me. Marry me. Let me be a father to your child. Beatrice could not breathe. You cannot mean that. You do not know me well enough to make that kind of offer. I know enough. I know you are kind and funny, and you do not complain even when you have every right to. I know you read with passion, and you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and you snore just a little when you are really tired. He smiled then, soft and tentative. I know that, when I found you in that storm, it felt like Providence. Like I was supposed to be there at that exact moment to find you. Colton, this is crazy. People do not get married after knowing each other for 4 days. People do not survive blizzards either, but you did. Maybe we are meant for crazy things. He squeezed her hand gently. I am not asking you to love me. I know it is too soon for that. I am just asking you to give us a chance. Give me a chance to prove I can make you happy. Beatrice looked down at this man who had saved her life, who had kept her secret without judgment, who was offering her everything she had thought was lost to her forever. A home, a future, a father for her child who would be there by choice, not obligation. And she realized that somewhere in the past 4 days she had started to fall in love with him. What about your sister? She asked. She is expecting me. We will send word. Let her know you are safe and you have made other plans. Colton's eyes searched hers. Say yes, Beatrice. Please say yes. She thought about the alternative, going to her sister's homestead, living as a dependent with a bastard child, always wondering what might have been if she had been brave enough to take this chance. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I will marry you. The smile that broke across Colton's face was like sunrise after a long night. He reached up and lifted her down from the horse, then wrapped his arms around her and held her close. Beatrice buried her face in his shoulder and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. They rode into but the next day. Beatrice's belongings packed on the mule. The town was still digging out from the storm, and people called out greetings to Colton as they passed. He nodded back but did not stop until they reached the small church at the end of the main street. The minister was an older man with kind eyes who did not ask too many questions when Colton explained that they wanted to be married right away. He called in his wife and the church organist to serve as witnesses, and within an hour, Beatrice Harlow became Beatrice Barnes. After the ceremony, they went to the general store where Colton bought supplies and Beatrice sent a telegram to her sister. Plans changed. Married and staying in Montana. Will write soon. All is well. Then they bought fabric and thread, and other household items Beatrice would need to make the cabin more comfortable. The storekeeper's wife gave Beatrice a knowing look when she noticed the way Beatrice's dress fit, but she did not say anything unkind. In a town like Butte, people had learned not to ask too many questions about other people's business. The ride back to the cabin took most of the afternoon, and by the time they arrived, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink across the snow-covered mountains. Colton helped Beatrice down from her horse, and she stood for a moment, looking at the little cabin that was now her home. Having second thoughts, Colton asked quietly. Beatrice turned to look at him, at this man who was now her husband, and felt a rush of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. Not even for a moment. That night, they sat together by the fire after supper, Beatrice leaning against Colton's shoulder while he read aloud from one of his books. His free hand rested lightly on her belly, and when the baby moved, he stopped reading and looked at her with wonder in his eyes. "Did you feel that?" Beatrice asked. "I did." His voice was rough with emotion. "That is amazing. The baby moves a lot now, especially at night." She covered his hand with hers. "Colton, are you sure about this? About raising another man's child as your own? This baby is yours, which makes it mine now too." "I do not care about biology. I care about being a father to this child and a husband to you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I meant what I said in my vows today. For better or worse, richer or poorer, as long as we both shall live." Beatrice turned her face up to his. "I know we agreed this did not have to be about love right away, but Colton, I think I am already falling in love with you." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Good, because I have been in love with you since you woke up in my bed and the first thing you asked about was your horse." When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Beatrice kissed him back, letting herself believe in new beginnings and second chances, and the kind of love she had never thought she would find. The winter months passed in a blur of contentment. Colton was attentive and careful with Beatrice as her pregnancy advanced, never letting her do anything too strenuous, and always making sure she was warm and well fed. He talked to the baby every night, his hand on her belly, telling stories about the mountains and the animals and what they would do together when the little one arrived. Beatrice, for her part, threw herself into making the cabin a home. She sewed curtains from the fabric they had bought and made quilts from scraps. She learned to cook on the small stove and became adept at stretching their supplies to make meals that were both filling and tasty. She organized Colton's haphazard shelves and mended his clothes, and discovered that she was happier here in this small cabin than she had ever been in all her years in Boston. They talked for hours every day, learning each other's quirks and habits, their hopes and fears and dreams. Colton told her about his sister Sarah and how much he missed her, about his plans to expand his cattle operation in the spring. Beatrice told him about her childhood in Butte, about the father she still missed even after all these years. She also told him more about Boston, about Marcus Pemberton, and how he had pursued her with pretty words and promises until she had believed he truly cared for her. How he had seduced her with talk of marriage and a future together, only to turn cold when she told him about the baby. "I was such a fool," she said one night as they lay together in the narrow bed, her back pressed against Colton's chest. "I thought he loved me. You were not a fool. You trusted someone who did not deserve it. That is his failing, not yours." Colton's arms tightened around her. "And if I ever meet this Marcus Pemberton, I will have a few choice words for him about how a real man treats the woman he claims to care about." Beatrice smiled in the darkness. "My fierce protector." "Always," he murmured against her hair. "You and this baby always." In early March, when the snow was starting to melt and the first hints of green were appearing on the hillsides, Beatrice's pains began. Colton rode into butt-through mud that was nearly as treacherous as winter snow and brought back the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Silver Bow County. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Beatrice was certain she could not go on. But Colton stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths and telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. When the baby finally came just before dawn, its first cry filling the cabin, Beatrice wept with relief and exhaustion. Mrs. Patterson cleaned the infant and wrapped it in a soft blanket, then placed the bundle in Beatrice's arms. "You have a son," the midwife said with a smile. "A fine, healthy boy." Beatrice looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Then she looked up at Colton, who was staring at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." "Would you like to hold him?" Beatrice asked. Colton nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and took the baby carefully in his arms. The infant quieted immediately, as if sensing the strength and safety in those weathered hands. Colton sat down in the chair beside the bed, cradling the baby close, and Beatrice saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "What should we name him?" she asked softly. Colton looked up at her, his green eyes bright. "I was thinking maybe James, after my father, but only if you want to." "James," Beatrice repeated, testing the name. "James Barnes, I like it." "James Colton Barnes," Colton corrected. "After both his grandfathers, Mrs. Patterson stayed for 2 days to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then left with instructions for Beatrice to rest and let Colton take care of everything for a while. Colton took this directive seriously, barely letting Beatrice lift a finger for the next 2 weeks. He was a natural with the baby, changing diapers and soothing fussy cries with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. When James woke crying in the night, it was often Colton who got up first, walking the floor with the infant cradled against his shoulder and singing old songs in his deep, rough voice. "You are going to spoil him," Beatrice said one night, watching from the bed as Colton paced with the baby. "A child cannot be spoiled by love," Colton replied. "Besides, look at him. How could anyone resist this face?" James chose that moment to let out a particularly loud belch, and Beatrice laughed despite her tiredness. "My boys," she said softly. "Both of you." As spring turned to summer, the little family settled into their life together. Colton worked hard bringing in his scattered cattle and branding the new calves, while Beatrice tended the small garden she had planted near the cabin and took care of James. The baby grew quickly, his eyes turning the same green as Colton's, and he seemed to recognize his father's voice from the very beginning. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Beatrice turned to Colton. "I need to tell you something." He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, quite the opposite actually." She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "I am pregnant again. Colton's eyes went wide. "You are certain? I have been through this before. Remember, I am certain." Beatrice watched his face anxiously. "I know it is soon, and I know we have our hands full with James, but I am happy about it. Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Colton pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. When he finally pulled back, he was grinning. "I am beyond happy. I am absolutely delighted. Even though we will have 2 babies under 2 years old, especially though," he kissed her again, softer this time. "I love you, Beatrice Barnes, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "So very much." The second baby, a daughter they named Caroline after Beatrice's grandmother, was born the following February on a day when the temperature was so cold that frost formed on the inside of the windows. She came into the world howling her displeasure at the cold, and she did not stop having opinions about everything from that moment on. Where James was calm and easygoing like his father, Caroline was fierce and determined. She walked at 9 months, climbing everything she could reach, and she had Colton wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she first smiled at him. "You are in so much trouble with this one," Beatrice said, watching Colton play with Caroline on the floor while James toddled around them. "I know," Colton said happily, "and I would not have it any other way. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were hard winters when the snow was so deep that Colton could barely get to the lean-to to feed the animals. There were dry summers when the grass turned brown, and they worried about having enough hay to get the cattle through the winter. There was the time when James got a fever that scared them both senseless, until it finally broke after 3 terrifying days. But there were good times, too. Their first Christmas together as a family, when Colton surprised Beatrice with a rocking chair he had built himself. The summer they took the children to Butte for the 4th of July celebration, and James rode a pony for the first time. The day Caroline took her first steps, walking straight into her father's waiting arms. 2 years after Caroline was born, Beatrice gave birth to twin boys, Benjamin and Samuel, who had Colton's dark hair and Beatrice's blue eyes. The cabin was bursting at the seams now, so Colton spent that summer building an addition, doubling the size of their home. "We are going to need more room if you keep having babies at this rate," he teased Beatrice as he framed out the new bedroom. "If I keep having babies." Beatrice replied, hands on her hips, "I seem to recall it taking 2 people to make them." Colton grinned and pulled her close, mindful of the baby she was nursing. "True enough. And I am not complaining, just so we are clear. I love our big, noisy family. Even when Caroline breaks your good hammer trying to fix her wagon, even then." He kissed her forehead. "Especially then." The years rolled by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Colton's cattle operation grew steadily, and eventually he had to hire on a couple of hands to help with the work. Beatrice kept the household running smoothly, an impressive feat with 4 young children and a baby on the way. Their 5th child, another daughter named Grace, was born on the first day of spring when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. She was tiny and perfect, with a cap of blonde hair that was nothing like either of her parents. "She must get it from someone in your family," Colton said, marveling at the infant in his arms. "My grandmother had blonde hair," Beatrice said. "I have seen pictures. Grace looks just like her." They were sitting on the porch, watching the older children play in the yard. James, now 7 years old and serious beyond his years, was helping Caroline corral the twins, who at 3 were into everything. The sound of their laughter filled the air, mixing with the lowing of cattle in the distance and the sweet scent of spring. "You ever think about him?" Colton asked quietly. The man from Boston. It was the first time he had asked in years. Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "Marcus, no, I do not anymore. Why do you ask? James asked me the other day if I was really his father." One of the hands said something about him not looking like me, and it got him thinking. Colton's jaw was tight. "I told him the truth, that I did not make him but I chose him, and that makes me his father in all the ways that matter. I think he understood." Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. "What did he say?" "He said he was glad I found you in the snow, that if I had not, he would not have the best father in the world." Colton's voice was rough. "Then he asked if we could go fishing this weekend, just the two of us." "That boy loves you so much," Beatrice said softly. "They all do. You are an amazing father, Colton. I had a good teacher." He looked at her, his green eyes full of warmth. "You made me want to be better, to be the kind of man worthy of you and our children. You were always that man. I just helped you see it." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Beatrice leaned her head on Colton's shoulder and thought about the strange path that had brought her here. The heartbreak in Boston, the desperate flight west, the blizzard that had nearly killed her, and the cowboy who had saved her life and kept her secret and loved her so completely that she sometimes forgot there had ever been a time before him. The children grew older, each one developing their own personality and dreams. James inherited Colton's love of the land and his quiet strength, spending hours riding the range and learning everything his father could teach him about cattle and horses. Caroline was fierce and independent, insisting on learning to rope and ride as well as any of the boys, and Colton never once told her she could not do something because she was a girl. The twins, Benjamin and Samuel, were inseparable and mischievous, always getting into some kind of trouble together. And Grace, the baby, was sweet and gentle, content to help her mother in the garden or with the household chores. When Beatrice turned 32, Colton surprised her with a trip to Butte to see a traveling theater company that was performing in the town hall. They left the children with the ranch hands and their wives, and for one evening they were just Colton and Beatrice, the young couple who had fallen in love in a snowstorm. Over dinner at the hotel restaurant, Colton reached across the table and took Beatrice's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" "Saying yes to me that day instead of going to your sister's," Beatrice laughed. "Not for one single second. Do you regret asking me? Only that I did not find you sooner." He turned her hand over and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Barnes. You and our children, you are everything." "You are everything to me too," she said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "I was so lost before I met you, so broken and scared, and you made me whole again. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never dreamed I could have." "We gave those things to each other," Colton corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you came into my life, surviving but not really living. You taught me how to live again." They stayed in Butte that night, a rare luxury, and made love slowly and sweetly in the big hotel bed. Afterward, Beatrice lay in Colton's arms and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear. "I am pregnant again," she whispered. She felt Colton's chest rumble with laughter. "I know. I have been waiting for you to tell me." "How did you know?" "Because I know you. I know every expression on your face, every gesture, every mood, and I recognize the signs." He pulled back to look at her. "How do you feel about it?" "Happy, tired, but happy." Beatrice smiled up at him. 6 children. We are going to have 6 children." 7 is a lucky number," Colton said, and Beatrice swatted his chest. "Let me get through this one first before you start planning the next." The 6th baby, another boy they named Daniel, was born in December, almost exactly 9 years after the blizzard that had brought Colton and Beatrice together. He came into the world during another snowstorm, and as Beatrice held him for the first time, she looked out the window at the swirling white and thought about how much had changed since that terrifying night when she had nearly died in the cold. "Another December baby," Colton said, sitting beside her on the bed. "Must be something about snowstorms that makes us lucky." "I am the luckiest woman alive," Beatrice said, meaning every word. "I have you and our beautiful children and this life we have built together. What more could I possibly want?" "Nothing," Colton agreed. "We have everything we need right here." As the years passed, the children grew and the ranch prospered. James, now 17, was preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with a skill and dedication that made both parents proud. Caroline, 15 and beautiful, had attracted the attention of several young men in the area, much to Colton's displeasure. "She is too young to be thinking about boys," he grumbled one evening as they watched Caroline ride off with a group of young people from town. "She is the same age I was when I met you," Beatrice pointed out. "That is completely different." "How so?" Colton was silent for a moment, then sighed. "It is not, is it?" "No, it is not." Beatrice linked her arm through his. "But I understand. No one is going to be good enough for our daughter in your eyes. No one was good enough for me in my father's eyes either. At least your father had good judgment." But Colton was smiling as he said it. The twins were 12 now, still inseparable but finally starting to develop their own distinct interests. Benjamin wanted to be a veterinarian and was always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Samuel was fascinated by mechanics and spent hours taking things apart and putting them back together. Grace, at 9, was her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and run a household. And Daniel, the baby at 5 years old, was the most adventurous of all of them, fearless and curious about everything. One evening in early spring, when the children were all occupied with their various activities, Colton took Beatrice's hand and led her out to the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the air was sweet with the scent of new grass and wildflowers. "You remember the first time we sat out here together?" Colton asked. "Of course. It was the night I told you I was pregnant with Caroline." Beatrice leaned against the porch railing. "That was 13 years ago. Where has the time gone? I have been thinking about that a lot lately, about time and how fast it goes." Colton moved to stand behind her, his arms coming around her waist. "James will be leaving for college in the fall. Caroline is not far behind. Before we know it, they will all be grown and gone, starting their own lives. Is that what has been bothering you? You have seemed distracted lately." "I am not bothered exactly, just reflective, I suppose." He rested his chin on top of her head. "I keep thinking about that day in the snow when I found you. If I had ridden out even an hour later, you would have been buried under the snow and I never would have seen you. We would never have had any of this." Beatrice turned in his arms to face him. "But you did ride out when you did, and you did find me, and we did have all of this. That is what matters." "I know, and I am grateful for every single day we have had together. I just want to make sure I tell you that enough. That I thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to wake up smiling every morning. Colton Barnes, you do not need to thank me for any of that. This life we have, we built it together. Every day we choose each other. And I will keep choosing you for as long as I live." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Beatrice felt the same spark she had felt the very first time his lips touched hers. After all these years, after 6 children and countless challenges overcome together, he could still make her heart race with just a look. "I love you," Colton whispered against her lips, "more than I could ever find words to say. I love you too, always." They stood there in each other's arms as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the children arguing about whose turn it was to set the table, and they both smiled. "We should go help with dinner," Beatrice said reluctantly. "In a minute. Let me just hold you a little longer." So they stood there on the porch of the home they had made together, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the night settle over the ranch. And Beatrice thought about secrets and snowstorms, and the unexpected ways that life could surprise you. She had come to Montana running from shame and heartbreak, carrying a secret she thought would ruin her life. She had nearly died in a blizzard, alone and afraid and certain that her story was ending before it had really begun. But instead, a cowboy had found her in the snow. A good man with a kind heart who had kept her secret and given her his name and loved her child as his own. A man who had shown her that the end of one story could be the beginning of another, better one. Years later, when Beatrice was in her 50s and the children were all grown with families of their own, someone asked her if she ever wondered how her life might have been different if she had not gotten caught in that blizzard, if she had made it safely to her sister's homestead all those years ago. "I do not wonder," Beatrice said simply, "because that blizzard gave me everything I have now. It brought me to Colton, and Colton gave me the world." The questioner, one of Caroline's daughters, tilted her head thoughtfully. "Grandmother, what secret were you carrying that day in the snow?" "The one grandfather kept for you." Beatrice looked across the porch to where Colton sat with their grandson on his knee, still as handsome to her at 60 as he had been at 26. He caught her eye and winked, and she felt her heart flutter the way it always did. "The secret," Beatrice said slowly, "was that I was carrying your Uncle James. I was unmarried and pregnant and running away from the shame of it. Your grandfather found me in that storm, and when I finally told him the truth, he married me anyway. He gave James his name and raised him as his own son, and he never once made me feel less than cherished because of my past." The young woman's eyes were wide. "I never knew that. Uncle James is not really grandfather's son." "Uncle James is absolutely your grandfather's son in every way that matters. Blood does not make a family. Love does. And your grandfather loved James from the moment he was born, just like he loved all of us. He chose our family, and he has spent every day since proving that choice was the right one." "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Beatrice smiled. "It was romantic. It still is. Every single day with that man is a gift I never take for granted." When everyone had gone home and it was just the two of them again, Colton and Beatrice sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch was quieter now that the children were grown, but it was still theirs, still the place where they had built their life together. "I told Emma today," Beatrice said, "about James and the blizzard and everything. How did she take it? She thought it was romantic, called us the most in love couple she had ever seen." Beatrice leaned her head on Colton's shoulder. "She is not wrong. I am still completely in love with you, Colton Barnes." "Good, because I plan to keep you around for a lot more years yet. We have got grandchildren to spoil and a ranch to run and a whole lot of sunsets left to watch together." "That sounds perfect to me." And it was perfect. Their life together had not always been easy, but it had been full of love and laughter, and the kind of contentment that came from choosing each other every single day. Beatrice had come to Montana with a secret, scared and alone and convinced her life was over. Instead, she had found a cowboy in a snowstorm, a man who had kept her secret, not as a burden to bear but as a gift to protect. A man who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable and given her a family when she thought she had lost everything. The secret that had driven her into that blizzard all those years ago was not a secret anymore. James knew the truth about his birth, and it did not change anything between him and Colton. The other children knew too, had always known because Colton and Beatrice believed in honesty within their family. But there was another secret that Beatrice had never told anyone except Colton. A secret she had confessed to him on their 10th wedding anniversary when they had taken a rare trip away from the ranch, just the two of them. "I was not really lost that day in the snow," she had told him. "I mean, I was turned around by the storm, but I could have kept going. I could have found shelter under that boulder and waited it out. But I was so tired, Colton, so tired of running and being afraid and facing everything alone. Part of me wanted to just close my eyes and let the snow take me. Part of me had given up." Colton had pulled her close, his eyes filled with understanding. "But you did not give up." "No, because I heard your horse and something in me decided to fight, decided that maybe my story was not over yet." She had looked up at him through tears. "You saved my life in more ways than one that day. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, to keep believing that good things were possible. You gave me hope." He had kissed her tears away and held her close. "You gave me hope too. You gave me everything." That was the real secret, Beatrice thought now as she sat on the porch with her husband of nearly 40 years. Not that she had been pregnant and unmarried when they met. Not that James was not Colton's biological son. The real secret was how close she had come to giving up, to letting the cold and the fear and the shame consume her. But she had not given up. She had fought to stay alive, and Colton had found her, and together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her broken life. Their grandchildren loved to hear the story of how they met, and Colton would always tell it with dramatic flair, making the snowstorm sound like the worst blizzard in Montana history and himself sound like a heroic figure riding to the rescue. Beatrice would roll her eyes and correct the exaggerations, but she loved hearing him tell it anyway. Because at the heart of the story, underneath all the drama and romance, was a simple truth. Two broken people had found each other in the middle of a storm and had chosen to build something together. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and family over loneliness. And that choice, made over and over again through the years, had given them a life neither of them could have imagined on that cold December day when Colton had lifted Beatrice's half-frozen body onto his horse and carried her home. When Beatrice was 70 years old, she and Colton celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house that Colton had built and added onto over the years was filled with noise and laughter, and the kind of chaos that came from having a large, loving family. James, now 57, and running his own successful ranch with his wife and children, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "The strongest, most loving people I have ever known. Dad, you taught me what it means to be a man of integrity and honor. You showed me that family is not about blood but about choice, and you chose me when you had no obligation to do so. I will be grateful for that choice every day of my life." His voice grew thick with emotion. "And Mom, you taught me that strength comes in many forms. You survived things that would have broken other people, and you did it with grace and courage. You taught me that love is worth fighting for, that family is worth everything, and that the best revenge against those who tried to break you is to build a beautiful life." To Colton and Beatrice, everyone chorused, and Beatrice felt tears stream down her face. Later that night, when everyone had gone and it was just the two of them again, Colton helped Beatrice up to their bedroom. They moved slower now, their joints creaky and their hair white, but they still held hands and still looked at each other with the same love that had been there from the beginning. "You remember what you said to me the day after I found you?" Colton asked as they got ready for bed. "When you woke up in this cabin for the first time, I asked where I was and who you were. And then you asked about your horse." Colton smiled. "I fell in love with you right then, I think." Any woman who wakes up half dead from exposure and the first thing she worries about is her horse, that is a woman worth knowing. I fell in love with you when you offered me broth and did not ask any questions, when you treated me with respect and kindness even though I was a stranger. Beatrice took his hand. "I have spent 48 years loving you, Colton Barnes, and it has not been nearly long enough. Then we will just have to make sure we get a lot more years. I am not done with you yet, Beatrice Barnes." They fell asleep that night as they had for thousands of nights before, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the snowstorm that had brought them together and the love that had kept them together all these years. When Colton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Beatrice held his hand and whispered thank you for everything, for saving her life and loving her and giving her a family and a home. She mourned him deeply, grieved the loss of her partner and best friend, but she did not regret a single day they had spent together. At his funeral, the church in Butte was packed with people whose lives Colton had touched. His children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the ranch hands he had employed over the years, neighbors he had helped through hard times, friends who had known him for decades. And Beatrice, standing at the front with her family around her, told them all the story one more time. The story of the blizzard and the cowboy and the secret that he had kept not because he had to, but because he loved her. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "He saved my life in that snowstorm, but more than that, he gave my life meaning. He showed me what real love looks like, what real strength is. And he loved our children with a fierceness that never wavered, not for a single day." She looked at James, standing with his arm around his wife, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He taught me that family is not about where you come from, but about where you choose to go. And he chose us, every single day, for 48 beautiful years." Beatrice lived for another 8 years after Colton died, surrounded by her loving family and sustained by the memories of their life together. She stayed in the house he had built for her, tending the garden they had planted together and watching the sunsets they had enjoyed side by side. When it was her time to go, she went peacefully in her sleep, a small smile on her face. And those who knew her best said she had finally gone to join her cowboy, the man who had found her in a snowstorm and loved her forever. At her funeral, Emma, Caroline's daughter who had asked about the secret all those years ago, stood to speak. "My grandmother used to say that the worst thing that ever happened to her turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. She said that getting caught in that blizzard, nearly dying in the snow, was the moment her real life began." Emma smiled through her tears. "She taught us that sometimes the things that break us are actually the things that make us, that shame and fear and regret do not have to define us. That love, real love, can heal even the deepest wounds, and that the best revenge against a world that tried to make her feel small was to live a big, beautiful, joyful life." Grandmother and grandfather built that life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. They chose love over bitterness, hope over despair, and family over everything. And they left behind a legacy that will carry on for generations. The Barnes family ranch still stands today, run by James's son and his family. On the porch where Colton and Beatrice spent so many evenings watching the sunset, there is a plaque that tells their story. It speaks of a snowstorm and a secret and a cowboy who kept it forever. It speaks of love that endured and family that flourished, and two people who found each other when they needed each other most. And every December, when the snow starts to fall across the Montana plains, The Barnes family gathers at the ranch to remember and celebrate. They tell the story again, making sure the youngest members of the family know where they came from and what their great-great-grandparents overcame to build the life they all now enjoy. Because Beatrice was right. The worst thing that ever happened to her, getting caught in that blizzard pregnant and alone and certain she was going to die, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. It brought her to Colton, and Colton gave her everything she had ever dreamed of and more besides. The secret she carried into that storm, the shame and fear and heartbreak, did not define her. What defined her was what she did after the storm passed, how she chose to love and be loved, how she chose to build a family and a life full of joy and meaning. How she chose, every single day, to believe that she was worthy of the good things that had come her way. And Colton, the cowboy who found her in the snow and kept her secret forever, proved that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Real love is about choosing someone, flaws and past and all, and committing to build a life with them no matter what comes. Their love story began with a snowstorm and a secret, but it did not end there. It grew and deepened and flourished through nearly 5 decades of marriage, 6 children, dozens of grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories. It was a love story that started with rescue and evolved into partnership, from desperation into deep abiding contentment, from fear into faith. And that, the Barnes family knew, was the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch or the money or the property, but the example of 2 people who loved each other completely and built something beautiful together. 2 people who proved that your past does not have to determine your future, that second chances are real, and that love, real lasting love, can overcome anything. The snowstorm that nearly killed Beatrice Harlow instead gave her life. And the cowboy who rescued her kept her secret not as a burden but as a sacred trust, a foundation on which they built a love that lasted forever. That was their story, and it was a good one, full of all the things that make life worth living. Love, family, hope, and the courage to keep choosing joy even when the world gives you every reason not to. Their story ended as all good stories do, with a life well lived, love well given, and a family that carries on their legacy of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else. And somewhere in the wide Montana sky, 2 souls found each other again, just as they had in that long-ago snowstorm, and knew that their love story would never truly end.